Welcome to the Soil and Roots podcast, where we dig beneath the surface to uncover the hidden ideas that form us, the church, and our culture. I'm Brian Fisher.
And I'm Kyle Moody.
This is episode 61. We are greenhousing episode 60, which was called Secret Invasion. If you have not been listening to Soil and Roots for a while, you may not know what a greenhouse episode is. So just by way of quick review, Soil and Roots as an organization helps to form and support small communities between 4 and 12 people called greenhouses. And one of the things that greenhouses do each week is a time of exploration. So we take material that we've discussed here on the podcast and basically beat it up. So we talk about questions or doubts or other things that we want to explore. It's a specific time in the rhythm of a greenhouse where we toy with things and work them out and wrestle with them in a group. So Kyle and I are modeling that for you. If you're in a greenhouse, if you're just listening, it's great to have you with us. We certainly invite you to take this material and these ideas and discuss them amongst your friends. But in the greenhouse environment, that's what we're trying to model.
Bees in your bonnet.
I'm sorry?
Bees in your bonnet.
What? Why did you even say that?
Because it's that goes with what you're saying. Like
Bees in your bonnet?
Yeah. You've never heard that?
Yes, but I don't think you're using that right.
I'm not?
No.
Yeah, it's when something is bothering you and you want to talk about it. That's if a bee's in your bonnet, you let it.
Oh.
You talk about, wait a minute. I'm confused about this. Or I don't understand.
Oh, I thought that's when somebody was like annoyed.
No.
Oh.
Maybe. I always thought it was, let's air it out. Let's open up your bonnet and let that bee out so we can
That's a very optimistic view of that phrase.
Head. Yeah.
It's good.
Okay.
You are, the optimist of the two of us for sure.
I try.
Yeah. Okay, so the first part of episode 60, we just did a review of the first 3 seasons. So we're 60-some episodes in, which blows my mind.
That's awesome.
Season 1, we basically set up the problem, the Great Omission, and we presented this, odd solution that deep discipleship, stages 4, 5, and 6 of the critical journey, is about digging beneath the surface into these ideas and desires that drive us. This is not the way that we usually look at church or even Christianity, or certainly not discipleship, as this exploration of ideas. So we laid that out in season 1. Season 2 is all about, how do we figure out what our ideas are? I mean, what if our heart is deceitful and is desperately wicked? Is there any hope that we can actually explore the ideas that power us? Season 2 addresses that happily, says absolutely yes, and we journey into Heartview, which is the way that God has wired us to actually explore those ideas. Season 3 is all about the formation gap, which is unfortunately, even if we recognize deep discipleship as the transformation of ideas, and we want to do Heartview, many times we're not in a community that actually is wired to do that.
Right.
So that's all about the formation gap. And the solution, of course, at least in the Soil and Roots ecosystem, are greenhouses. So as you were listening through the review, questions, things lingering, a bee in your bonnet, perhaps?
Let's let those bees out. So in the first collection of episodes, you talk a lot about deep discipleship.
Yeah.
And about us being awake.
Yeah.
We need to be awake. What exactly do you mean by that? So what does that mean if we are journeying toward being awake? What does that look like?
It's a friend of mine actually first used the phrase a year or two ago, and I talk about this awareness in a couple different ways. It's digging beneath the surface. It's being awake. It's being attuned. More ancient writers would have said self-awareness or self-contemplation. And it's not just related to ourself. It's living in a way that we are aware of what's going on beneath the surface in our own hearts and in what's going on around us. And I would argue this is where Jesus lived. Jesus seemed to operate in the realm of ideas and desires. This is why, he rarely answered a question that was asked of him. This is why his parables seem sometimes vexing. Some of his public teaching, he uses hyperbole. I mean, he's intentionally provoking to dig into our hearts beneath our belief statements and say, well, what's really going on? So when somebody is awake, they are attuned, they are aware of a lot of things that are driving them, but they're also aware of what's driving and powering people around them. And they also tend to be able to see it in culture.
Okay. Do you think, and as you were talking, because it's very, very difficult to hear that word awake and not think of woke. and all the
It's-
crazy stuff that goes with that.
Yeah, it's
Now,
not related to that.
oh, I know, but as you were talking, I started thinking, now wait a minute. Is it possible? And I can't wait to hear your response to this. Is it possible
I can't
that-
wait to give it to you.
that this whole is it possible that this whole woke movement is an idea of light that has been corrupted into an idea of darkness, into the fact that what you were talking about, what you were saying about how when someone is awake, it's about knowing who Jesus is, who they are, and how they line up with him and what their purpose is. Isn't that really at the heart of what this whole woke thing is? But it's been horribly corrupted and it's been horribly twisted into something that is seclusive. It is damaging. It is detrimental to what really people want. I mean, and again, maybe I'm being overly optimistic. Maybe I'm being naive. But when you were talking about that, I couldn't help but think about the parallels between those two. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when I'm using the term awake, that is in reference to somebody who is immersed in Jesus and is able to see and discern ideas in their hearts and in culture that align with the kingdom of light. Every other idea system is based on other ideas, right?
Right.
So wokeism is a system of ideas. And, if you watch it in culture, most of the time the arguments are at a surface level. I don't think many folks are actually digging underneath the surface to explore the ideas that are driving any type of ideology that doesn't align. Pick a religion that doesn't align with Christianity. This is why, I gave the example in one episode I watched a video of a woman who was confronting a Christian apologist about hell and was asking all these questions about hell. And the apologist was dutifully answering her questions. But as a person who's trying to work on discerning ideas below the surface, I wanted to sort of scream at the video because I kept wanting to say to the apologist, she's not asking what she's really asking.
Right.
Like, you're answering the surface question. Her question is not about hell. Her question has to do with her story. Right. She's angry. She's embittered. It was evident that she had been mistreated. And you might give her the doctrinally correct answer of hell, but you're not actually addressing the need in her heart.
Right.
That was my concern. And I see the same thing in terms of how we're arguing about woke ideology. We tend to live above the surface instead of going underneath the surface and saying what ideas are driving somebody who subscribes to that.
Right.
That's where we should at least try to have some conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't help but when you say awake, I can't help but draw the parallels to it. And again, I know that's not what you're saying, but again, I think it's important to explore that because I think at the root of it, there is this idea of togetherness. There is this idea of they want to have some sort of peace or some sort of understanding of the world, and that has been horribly corrupted.
Well, if you were to map the 6 core ideas, remember we talked about identity, anthropology, value, power, purpose, and love. Those are the 6 core ideas. If you were to take out a sheet of paper and map them in terms of biblical Christianity, that reality, versus wokeism or communism or pickenism, you're going to see drastic differences in those underlying fundamental ideas. And I think that's where the conversation should be had. We normally are arguing above the surface. So I'm not trying to develop a parallel between wokeism and awake. Maybe we can use the word attuned. It's somebody who is aware of those things. Right. And who sort of operates in that world. And the reason, again, is because if we're trying to become more like Jesus, I think that's where he lived. I think even the way that, I've used the rich young ruler, the woman at the well, his interactions with Peter, his interactions with the Pharisees. Jesus is constantly aware and inviting those around him to cut beneath the surface statements, the religiosity, the rules, the regulations, and to investigate and explore the desires and ideas that are actually powering us.
Right. And that right there, I think, is key to all of this, is becoming more contemplative, digging, you say it in almost every episode, but there is so much truth in the fact of digging beneath the surface, because we look at all these things and we just assume this stuff. But like you said, inviting people or journeying with them into this murky, sticky, uncomfortable sometimes situation where what's really going on here? What's really what is the idea?
Well, I mean, do you ever have these conversations with Michelle where she's upset or she's frustrated or she's anxious, and you sort of realize, oh, what she's saying is not really what's going on?
Oh, of course, but it took me a long time
Yeah.
to figure that out, instead of just reacting to my thing like, well, wait a minute, she's not understanding me.
Right.
She's misconstruing this, so now I'm trying to defend myself.
Well, but the argument is usually not the argument.
Right. There's something deeper.
And that's what I'm saying. A good husband is attuned, not just to what his wife says, but to what's going on in her heart. Understanding that, we talked about this in season 2, the things we say are rarely indicative of what's actually going on underneath the surface. So if we can develop that practice in our close relationships, we can also practice that relationship with our own hearts, and then we begin to see them actually, those ideas, the dark and the light ideas at work in culture, in governments, in the media, in the movies that we watch, in the songs that we listen to, in the books that we read. They're everywhere. I mean, the world, I've become increasingly convinced, is powered by ideas.
Right. But again, it takes work. It's a lot of work.
It's training to kind of,
And
I'm a neophyte, and I'm still trying to work it on,
Man,
understanding
you're dropping all
these
these SAT words.
Yeah. Look it up.
Yeah, I will. But yeah, it's just the work that it takes and the time and the effort. But
it's listening. This is critical.
Well, of
I
course.
just read, I may have been a Stephen Covey quote or something. Most people listen. I'm going to butcher this. Most people listen to form their response, not to actually hear what's being said. That's the paraphrase. I'm not getting it right.
But the idea.
You understand?
Oh yeah.
The secret. It's not a secret. We'll just call it a secret. To being awake is to be a heart listener. We talked about heart listening in season 2. It's recognizing what's going on. It's listening to what the heart is saying, not what behaviors are saying or what the words are saying. Our 8 indicators. It's the ability to actually look beneath that and say, oh, that's what's going on. And obviously, if we can't practice it with ourselves, we're going to have a hard time doing that, serving somebody by listening to their hearts well when it's other people.
Yeah. I mean, and that takes patience. It takes courage. It takes strength. And to be able to sit and listen to what the person is saying, not just waiting for my turn to talk.
Yeah. Because
it's just, it's such a game changer. And I mean, you brought up Michelle. I mean, that in our marriage, at the beginning of our marriage, I mean, I handled, looking back on, we just had a conversation about something like this just recently. And I was just like, babe, I am so sorry. I handled things just the wrong way. And I was so defensive, and I was so quick to try to fix it and not really listen to what was really underneath. What were you really upset about? What was it? It wasn't what I thought was, it's me. It's all me. It's my fault. It's, let me dig a little bit deeper. And when we can unlock that, I mean, that's what that whole first part of the podcast is all about, is identifying these ideas and figuring out what they mean and how they've affected us and how our stories have been molded by these ideas.
Yeah.
Is just, I mean, I use the word too often, but game changer. I mean, it's huge. It's revolutionary when you understand that that's how you've been functioning and what you've been doing.
Yeah, it's getting good at asking the question why and asking the question how. I mean, a good listener is always trying to figure out how to ask questions that serve the person they're with and move beneath the surface. And you can do that. You can ask the why questions even of cultural elements. Why is this stream of movies so popular? What's resonating? Why is this news story catching? Why is this news story not catching? You can pick up ideas of both kingdoms in individuals and people, but also in culture. And that's when we're really getting deep. Now, in Soil and Roots, we have dealt almost exclusively with ideas in our own hearts. In season 4, we are going to start touching on what does it mean to be recognizing ideas in churches and in culture. And that's, we're sort of expanding. The whole Soil and Roots journey is progressive, meaning we're progressing slowly into deeper and deeper pools of discipleship. So we've primarily been focused on ideas in our own hearts and those around us. So it gets back to this concept of spiritual formation and how we are formed to become more like Jesus. One of the ideas that we're wrestling with in episode 60 is, are we becoming like Jesus only in his characteristics, or are we becoming more like Jesus also in his mission, in his purpose? So early on, we talked about God has placed us into 4 relationships.
Right.
We have a relationship with God, we have a relationship with others, ourselves, and creation. So all the way back to season 1 in the creation picture, right? We have a relationship with the invisible author of creation, with ourselves, with our own roots, with other people, and with creation itself in the 7 mountains of culture. So we know that the very first bad idea, the dark idea, that the serpent suggested to Adam and Eve in the garden, they embraced. They took it into their hearts. It formed them.
They took it as truth.
They took it as an idea, yeah. And it resulted in a cosmic corruption of the universe. So you want to talk about power of ideas. One dark idea birthed, it's a way to look at it, the kingdom of darkness. So, and it corrupted, it distanced, it broke all 4 of those relationships. Fast forward to now, my suggestion, idea to be discussed and debated at home or in greenhouses, is that modern Christianity primarily views the redemptive work of Christ as only restoring one of those relationships, our relationship with God. It has some hope for our relationship with others. We see that in the form of, marriage classes and biblical financial classes and whatnot. We have sort of this fragmented view that the gospel should have some sort of impact on relationships. We have virtually no work being done in terms of how the gospel impacts our relationship with ourselves. It's usually constrained to a counseling room, but it's not widely expected. I'm not even sure how much modern Christianity talks about or explores our relationships with ourselves. And in terms of our relationship with creation, the presiding idea is that creation is inevitably under the rule of darkness and can't be redeemed. So we have an idea of darkness that was so powerful that it infected all 4 of our relationships. But really, the underlying idea in modern Christianity is that Jesus's ideas right now are actually really only helpful in terms of one of those relationships. So that's one of the questions we ask. Why? Why should the darkness's ideas be wholly corruptive and effective at that corruption, but Jesus's ideas are only effective right now at impacting 1 out of 4 relationships? It seems that the ideas of darkness are more powerful and more pervasive than ideas of light.
Do you think the reason for that is because people constantly refer to the passage of how the world is the devil's playground and he's a roaring lion, and do we automatically think that, well, it's hit, and there's that whole, you're in the world, not of the world. So is it this idea that, well, the world is, even without explicitly saying it, but referencing those scriptures and saying, well, obviously the devil is in control. Now, if we're going to do this is what we're talking about with these level of ideas and digging beneath the surface.
Very deep.
Okay.
Yep.
So if we're going to believe that the world is the devil's playground and he's in control of it, and we look around and all these things, then wouldn't that have to mean that God is either not as powerful as Satan, or he's just completely taken his hands off the wheel and he's like, okay, well, Satan, I'm going to let you rule the earth until I come back or I redeem it or whatever. And the world's just going to hurtle towards darkness, because wouldn't we have, what are the other alternatives if we're going to believe that the world is the devil's playground? Then where does God play in all that?
Well, we're going to explore that, in some detail as we head through this season. I think it does. You're asking excellent questions, which is how powerful are the ideas of darkness versus the ideas of light? Again, we're going to frame the kingdoms in that realm for the whole season. It's a very different way of looking at the kingdom. It's out of the box. Some people are going to love it. Some people are going to struggle with it, which is fine. But we're going to position Jesus and the inception of the kingdom as the invasion of God's ideas coming back into a world that's been broken in order to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, how many of the relationships did he come to fix? That's an area of a tremendous disagreement right now in the West and in Christendom.
Yeah. Okay. Why do you think that is? Why can we not agree that he came to redeem all four and it's only just one or two?
I think, I'm one guy, but I think it is a 300 or 400 year progression starting in the Middle Ages, where the Middle Ages sort of assumed that God was God of all and that the gospel had implication for all four relationships. But once you got into the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, the rise of, science was birthed by almost entirely Christians, but that's become increasingly non-Christian. The supernatural is treated as esoteric. Values have become highly subjective. You have this massive shift of the ideas that undergird Western thought to, instead of things being integrated and cohesive, we now live in an environment where things are disintegrated and to some extent randomized. Okay, so what that means is it's infected Christianity to a large degree, and we see it in all kinds of different ways. So things that used to be held together are now split apart. Things that used to be considered integrated are now disintegrated. So when that's the sort of undergirding ethos that you're born into, it becomes fairly easy to look at those four relationships and say, well, Jesus really only came to reconcile one, and the other three we just sort of have to try to keep our head up and our expectations level and, just see what happens instead of looking at Jesus's ideas as being comprehensively curative and more powerful than the ideas that started the kingdom of darkness in the first place.
And again, do you think it comes down to trust? Like we need to okay, well, before you just say no, let me ask, let me just explore this a little bit. If we think that Jesus, if we're thinking that, it's easier, like you said, it's easier to think that he only came to redeem one or two of them, right?
The relationships.
Yes, the relationships of those four.
Well, it's not easier. I think that's the ethos we're born into.
But you don't think that most people do that because it's easier just to accept that and to accept the other fact that you can't redeem.
I think it's just
other.
what is.
Okay.
I'm not sure many of us have sat down and thought about it the way that we're trying. That's why we're trying to reframe the conversation.
Right. Yeah.
If I look at my own upbringing, my own life, that was what it was.
Yeah. Well, and for me, I think it was easier. I didn't have to think about all this other stuff. I'm like, I don't have to think about creation. I don't have to think about myself. It's just, he saved. It's easy to think, he saved me, or he saved that's it. So I focus on those two, and I don't have to get deep into myself because all my baggage and all my stuff. Does that make sense?
Well,
you see what I'm saying?
Easier. Yeah, man. I guess. I understand.
You don't have to agree. It's okay. But
no, I'm trying to.
You can be wrong on this one.
I'm trying to. Why would it be harder? Is what I'm trying. Like, what's harder about Jesus reconciling all things versus only one of their relationships?
That overarching idea is not harder, but when you break down those four, I think it's much more difficult to think, how is he redeeming me? How is he redeeming his relationship with me? Then it's the relationship of, he's redeeming the relationship with,
You mean it's just more complicated?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's harder to really dive into that than...
Yeah, again, I think it's only harder because that's the ethos we are raised into. I think if this generation were born into a Christian ecosystem where it was assumed that Jesus is reconciling all things, it wouldn't be hard at all.
Right.
It's just what we know.
Yeah.
We tackled it from the four relationships. I've also presented it in terms of the two commissions. We have the cultural commission, Genesis 1:28, and we have the Great Commission in Matthew. And I've posed in one of the episodes, hey, look, why do we think the Great Commission is going really well, but the cultural commission is a disaster? Like, how do those two things not fit together?
Right.
If the Bible is a grand, cohesive, amazing narrative of human history up until the end of the age, why do we consider the Great Commission to be so powerful, so central, so necessary for the spread of Christianity? But we look at the very first thing God said to humankind, and at least as best as I can tell, gets virtually no airplay anywhere. Why is it that man's role as kings and queens, rulers, stewards, vice regents of the created order, why does that get pushed to the very bottom of the discussion, if it's discussed at all, in favor of, making disciples? I think that's another disintegration. It's a distortion of what the kingdom is actually all about. I think we're so far outside the ethos of the kingdom. It's concerning. I think it's impacted not only the church. I think it's had a devastating impact on culture.
It goes back to trust. I think that a lot of people
love that word. Trusting what?
Trusting God, that He's going to do that. Because if we're going to trust that, or if we're going to believe that God is actively redeeming, or He already has in those 4 relationships, if He's already redeemed the earth, right? Or He's redeeming it, right?
Probably both, yeah.
Okay. Then again, it's like, well, I look around, I look at the media, I look at maybe instances in my own life where I've lost someone close to me, or I've lost a job, or whatever else. We look at these things and go, well, where's God in this? It's so easy, I think, to lose trust in those dark moments, in those difficult moments, because then it's like, well, if I could really trust God, if He's really doing what He says He's going to be doing, then why am I suffering so much?
I'm not sure it's I get what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
Coming around.
Okay.
I'm coming around. It's taking me a while.
Fantastic.
I gave a definitive no. That was unfair of me. It was not unfriendlike.
You can say no all you want. You'll still be my good friend.
I'm not. I think that most Christians trust God to eventually work it all out. I think it's a matter of timing and what we're doing right now. So I don't know if there's that many Christians that don't think that whatever their concept of the afterlife isn't going to be amazing,
right?
That everything sad is going to become untrue, that all of the heartbreak and the pain that we're experiencing now, which is very real, and the suffering and the harm and the evil, which is all very real, is not at some point going to be resolved, and that our eternal state is not perfect and blissful and amazing. That's not the question. The question, I think, is what is the kingdom doing right now?
Mm-hmm.
That's where everybody has voluminous, very loud disagreements.
Yes.
And that's what has caused a lot of confusion. So that's where I'm getting a little bit hung up on the word trust, because it's not that we don't trust He's going to do it. I'm not sure we're trusting that He's doing it right now.
That's my point, is that it's
so you need me to actually clarify your statements.
Yes.
Please.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm here to serve you.
Oh, man.
I'm not necessarily looking at it as can I trust God in the midst of my brokenness right now? Although I agree with you. What I'm saying is, I'm trying to think of it. So Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
So most Christians would look at Hollywood and say it's spewing out very harmful, damaging ideas that have had a profoundly kingdom of darkness impact on culture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is it redeemable?
Oh, of course.
Can it? Well, I'm asking in a generic sense. Is that something that we should expect to be redeemed and restored, something that promotes ideas of the kingdom of light more than darkness? And are we actually working towards that end, or do we assume that mountain is so far gone that it is irredeemable? I think, my perception, that most people who are following Jesus look at something like that and say it just has to be avoided, it just has to be escaped, it just needs to be boycotted. We are not to be looking, because it inevitably must sort of die in a waste of, evil ideas, I guess. And I think that expectation has an enormous impact on how we live our lives. Maybe this is what you were getting to in terms of it's harder. It is harder to say, wow, I see a mountain of culture that is struggling and I want to be a part of the restoration and redemption of that, versus boycotting, leaving, saying, well, it's irredeemable. I think those are two pretty different ways of operating life, living life. Have you ever encountered somebody who has struggled with a lifelong habitual sin?
Have I? Yeah.
Okay. And their idea of expectation about the world actually plays into their idea of expectation about whether or not they can conquer that sin.
What do you mean? No, go into that.
We're integrated people living in an integrated world.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of, and I've suffered from the same idea. If we don't believe that sanctification is real,
mm-hmm.
if we actually don't believe that we can become more like Jesus,
mm-hmm.
if we don't actually believe that in 5 years from now we can love, think, relate, discern, look at ideas more like Jesus than we can now. If that's just not our expectation for whatever reason, that ties in to our expectation of where the kingdom and the world are heading. Right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we need to just be conscious of that. If we have a Christian fatalistic perspective about the kingdom, either that, the kingdom is entirely future, or the kingdom is going to struggle mightily to reconcile all things prior to the end of the age, there's a tie-in there to the expectation of the kingdom's ideas having an effect on me personally. I'm not sure how many Western Christians, because of all sorts of fatalistic views, disintegrated views, the idea that God can reconcile me to himself but isn't reconciling the other three relationships, the idea that the first commission, the cultural commission, is null and void or isn't possible, but the Great Commission is, as those things sort of seep into our soils, they absolutely impact our view of our own sanctification, of our marriages being restored, of our relationships with our kids being restored, of the ability to, overcome individual racism or whatever. I'm not sure how many of us expect to actually become more like Jesus individually. So then why would we expect his kingdom to have a cosmic impact across all four relationships or all seven mountains of culture?
And how easy it is to get reinforcement on that idea, on that corrupted idea, when we look at the media and we look at everything going on. Right. Yeah. It's just like, there's proof positive that this is the reality.
Well, it is proof positive that the world continues to struggle, but I've argued this before. We have virtually no ability to get any sort of reporting or stories on how the kingdom is growing. I mean, comparatively, we have next to none.
I mean, that makes sense. I mean, that if,
good news doesn't sell. Do you want to pray?
Yes, I would love to pray for us. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to discuss this. You want us to dig. You want us to explore. You want us to draw closer to you, and sometimes it's sticky. Sometimes it's messy. But you're right there with us, and you love us so much. Father, I pray that you'll be with us as we journey into this idea of the kingdom. I pray for Brian and I pray for everybody listening, that our hearts would be open, that we would be willing to go into our own story and go into our own soil and explore what it is that's in there that is good, what is in there that has been corrupted, and the things that you want to use to draw us closer to you. Help us to draw into deep discipleship with you, and help us to understand why you came, why you sent Jesus, why he was here, what his mission was, and what our job in that mission is. We love you so much, Father. We praise you. You are awesome, and you're always up to something good. In Jesus' name, amen.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. If you have any questions, want to talk more about the concepts of one of the episodes, or you're interested in a greenhouse, just check out the website at soilandroots.org. And as always, you can email us at fish@soilandroots.org. And we'll see you next time.